Okay, so for the last couple weeks, I've been trying something different. I have been making smaller videos, and I still want to continue to make larger videos that I will make more synthetic essays. That is, essays where I'm synthesizing material from various philosophical traditions and trying to make that stuff relevant to current problems of today. So these smaller courses are on various philosophical traditions, and this is to allow the audience to get informed with the ideas and philosophies that they may not be familiar with, and allow me to talk about these traditions without continuously trying to explain them while I'm talking on these larger videos. So if you're hearing something that doesn't sound familiar to you and you need it to be broken down more, look in my video series and you can find little smaller versions of them. So this allows me to kind of continue talking about bigger picture issues without dumbing things down and or watering things down. So it allows me to keep very dense material. I'm trying to find a balance here between how to simplify information while at the same time keeping the material and the ideas as, well, philosophical as I can. So, for example, in this particular essay, I'll be talking about a concept in phenomenology called affordance. So if you don't know what phenomenology is, start with the series on Husserl. Take you about an hour to get through, and maybe a little bit on the thinker after that, Scheller, because this is where we're going to start dealing with this idea of affordance. So affordance is something that comes out of Scheller and Heidegger and many other philosophers, but what they're trying to do is get back to essences. And so this particular essay is going to be on the human essence. And so we need to be able to understand how we can scientifically demonstrate essences exist, and then we can start talking about the human essence. And so this is more of like an anthropological video today. So you're still free to listen without knowing anything about phenomenology. I hope that it's still understandable. I mean, phenomenology is something that should be a method that anyone can use and understand, but if you just want to be more informed on it. And I'll also be dealing with a philosopher named Merleau-Ponty and another one named Dufresne. They're also up there. So the idea of affordance is, in short, this concept that if we were to suspend that we have knowledge of essences, we then can look at it a different approach. We can say, well, let's project meaning onto things. And if I project meaning onto things, some things will receive that meaning better than other things, and some things will push back differently. So the easy example I always use is if I have a piece of charcoal and a stick. These are both objects found in nature. These aren't something that human society has given a structure to, but they already have a structure in them. And we as humans can then project the meaning onto them as writing utensil. And the piece of charcoal will receive that meaning a lot better than the stick will. The stick can, but the charcoal receives that meaning. It has a disposition for receiving a constructed meaning, a social construct of writing utensil. And so what I'm trying to get at with this is that this idea of social constructs, they don't destroy the meaning of the universe. Objects in the universe still have a affordability to meaning. They can receive meaning, and this also means that we can't just turn anything into anything else. Objects in the world, including the human body, has a receptivity to meaning and a pushback to meaning. So it has an affordance of meaning. And this is kind of getting at the heart of what's been happening a lot today with gender theory and this idea that there is no human essence, and that that flesh itself is, you could say, a social construct, and it's something, just a byproduct of material and economic conditions. Okay, so we're going to contrast then this phenomenological tradition with two major thinkers on this issue, Judith Butler and Michel Foucault. These thinkers are very prominent in today's zeitgeist, especially in feminism. And when we're talking about this idea of everybody being an oppressed or an oppressor, this kind of Marxism, a lot of this is going to have its roots in Foucault, although he's a little bit more dynamic than that. Judith Butler will then take a lot of this as well and apply to gender theory, that your gender is sort of the byproduct of social oppressions and social repressions. So these two will be a big split. Foucault and Butler in particular will be a big split in anthropology. And they claim to use the methodology of phenomenology, but that'll be also part of my critique, because I think they selectively use it. I don't think, just as they selectively will use biology, so they're not truly utilizing this as a rigorous science in my analysis. We'll start with where this phenomenological problem begins, and that's with Sartre. And Sartre will switch the basis of natural law. He'll say that the human essence doesn't exist, that existence precedes essence. So that means that there's no predetermined thing there, that in classical metaphysics we'll say that there is a predetermined essence and that it is animated by existence. What's called esse. And I have a video on maritime too, that if you want to go more into that. When we're dealing with Sartre, he says that all you are is something like a shadow or a nothingness. His book that goes into this is actually called Being in Nothingness, that you create your essence. There is no predetermined, and that this is what he grounds his idea of freedom in, is that you're condemned to freedom, and that this is how we are able to be free. So Judith Butler is going to take this and she's going to run with it and apply it to our sexuality and gender, and this is where gender theory is going to come from, is that sexuality, there is no predetermined, it's all performative, and that there is no essential qualities, there is no affordance to sexuality. It's all just kind of an empty blank slate, and that performative acts over time starts to solidify or create an illusion of something stable, of a stable essence. But really, all of this is just structured by social and economic forces. So in both of these anthropologies, in Butler and in Sartre, there is an emptiness, a nothingness, and that substance is nothing but this created over time through repeated actions, and these actions are structured by social forces. And so man is nothing more than the byproduct of social forces, which is very Marxist as well. Marx doesn't explicitly talk like this. And this is in direct contrast to natural law and the natural law tradition, which says that you do have a nature, and your nature has what's known as a teleology, meaning it moves towards predefined purposes. These are most easily understood in biological appetites. So for instance, I have a hunger for food and nutrition. I have a thirst for liquids and hydration. My body wants these things. These aren't social forces. And I may experience them as a desire for pleasure, liquid pleasure, or salty food pleasure, but the body is still objectively giving these appetites to my consciousness. And this then would also apply to sexuality, that my body is giving me a neurological and a biological imperative, and I may perceive it, my consciousness, as a desire for beauty, a desire for affection. However, the libido manifests itself. And so these are what we're going to call a priori appetites, and they are, using our language that we're going to bring into this, they are affordances of the flesh. Okay, so they're primary natures. They're there before culture. The structuralists and the Marxists that we were talking about, they'll be fighting this. They'll be resisting this. Sartre and Foucault and Butler, they'll deny all of this. And that's the tension. And you know, I'm obviously going to be trying to make my argument that from the natural law position. So going into the affordance, then we find that the world has a rich diversity of essences, of things that afford certain meanings, that they receive certain meanings or don't receive certain meanings. And in the natural world, these objects also have their own teleology, their own appetites, their own drives. Like, I don't have a drive to build a nest the way that a bird just wakes up one day and decides now it's time to build a nest, right? That teleology is there, it's part of its nature. And this is prior to society, to social constructs. And animals have their own behaviors, their own motivations, and their own drives, while humanity, we are capable of social constructs. We can take something like an orange or an apple and we can use it to satisfy our natural appetites, but we can also make it into a painting or into a decoration of the house, the way we do with like flowers, for example, right? These aren't built in human society, they're found in nature, but then they're integrated into society and we give them a new meaning. We give them an aesthetic meaning rather than a biological meaning. And this is the same, you take a cow and give it a much more complex meaning and turn it into the center of a social gathering, having steaks with the family on your birthday. We got layers and layers of meaning. You got the social meaning of being with your family, the rituals that come with seeing extended family members, catching up, and then having a birthday, the celebration of an event. We do this with other animals in different ways, like a dog we bring into the family. We integrate the animal into the family. So again, something that's taken from nature, we add to it a new social construct as a secondary family member or equal in the family to some degree. We can train it to be a guard dog too, teach it tricks, right? Add layers of meaning onto that. So these added layers of meaning we're going to call secondary essences, meaning that there's the natural teleology that the animal already has, the dispositions that the animal already has, and we will cultivate those dispositions and add onto them. We'll realize that the dog is smart enough to teach tricks to. We'll realize that the horse is stable enough in its behavior to ride, whereas maybe a hyena, not going to make the best pet around the house, right? The receptivity to being another family member isn't afforded by the hyena. Hyena's got too sharp of teeth, it's too wild. Right? Its dispositions, its first nature, are not receptive to that second nature. And a little later, we'll even go into like a third nature, which would be like technology, which would be something that you would add on top. So like putting the sweater on top of the animal, right? You're not just cultivating its natural instincts, you're putting another layer of ability to the animal. Now the animal can stay out longer in the snow. You're enhancing its nature not through its behavior, but through technology. Okay, so this first nature, we're going to use a analogy from art, and we're going to talk about it as an armature. So in sculpture, you have to have an armature that sets up the form, that sets up the structure of if it's a portrait or a horse or a body, and that gives the stability that then you're going to put the clay on. And the clay is what we're going to talk about as the second essences. So in the animal, the clay is going to be, again, the cultivation of certain behaviors, sit, stay, right? The form is already there, and then we're adding these second essences to it. In human terms, though, this armature and clay analogy is going to be that there is a human nature that is the armature, and then social constructs add on top of it. So it's my human nature to want to not be cold. It's part of just my biology. How I solve that is going to be the social constructs. And this is where we get into the gender stuff. Maybe I'm going to use a kilt. As a man, I can use a kilt to stay warm. Am I performing gender at this point? I don't know. If I'm part of a ritual, I would say like now we're starting to bring into this if this is my way of signaling to other men my rank within the tribe, yeah, now we're starting to get into like a performative gender. Okay. Now we are starting from this idea that phenomenology through affordance can give us some access to essences. And the fundamental mandate of phenomenology was to return to things themselves and to describe the structure of what was called the life world as they are given to consciousness. In the realm of philosophical anthropology, this requires acknowledging that human consciousness is itself bound to a biological armature of first essences, that is the body. This armature is not some neutral, malleable blank slate. It already possesses its own inherent teleology, and with that, it has an objective structure. We can add to it, again, we can put clay onto it, but there is already a objective structure there. Now, with people like Mikhail Dufresne and Scheller, they'll take this even further, that beyond just my biology, beyond just kind of these natural law biological appetites that we had talked about, that we can see a universal emotional and aesthetic a priori. Like something like sorrow is universally part of the human essence. That's not malleable. Now, they have their ways of explaining why someone may not have sorrow, and we'll get into that. But they allow us, in particular, as far as I'm so interested in these people, they allow us to talk about things like emotional states and aesthetics as universal and objective. And this allows us to talk about objective beauty and objective art, which I'll later, videos later, not in this video, but much later, I'll try to make videos on, because that's where I want to go with this. I want to get into trying to save aesthetics and trying to get into objective beauty, but we still have to first save the objective human nature before we can talk about any kind of objective human appreciation for beauty. So we will begin with Merleau-Ponty, who demonstrates that this lived body encounters the world not as a detached, pure ego, but rather as what he calls an intentional arc, a field that projects meaning upon our physical capacities, that the body that we have allows us to perceive according to how our body perceives. So not just through our sensual powers do we perceive, but through what he calls this intentional arc. We are immediately given access to affordance. So in a couple easy examples, you see stairs, you don't think about it. You're not going through some mechanical process. I have 3-foot legs with hinges on them and ankles. I have to make these particular movements with my feet and ankles the way an artificial intelligence is going to have to do this, right? They have to go through this kind of subjective ego where there's this computational power doing all of this math, looking at the stairs, analyzing the stairs, and then they're carrying it out. We don't do that. We look at the stairs and immediately, as though the stairs were an extension of our own body, we know how to move down the stairs. We know how to immediately use a typewriter. Another example he talks about is a blind man with a stick. The blind man uses a stick as though it's an extension of his own body. And you do this when you drive a car. You treat the car as though it's an extension of your own body. So this is part of your intentional arc, that you get access to a expanded consciousness through your senses. You receive information through your senses, but you get an expansion of what you can do, an expansion of your consciousness through what you can do. So to push this concept to its conclusion, affordance is not some subjective hallucination. I see a road and I know I can walk on the road. This isn't a hallucination, or is it a social construct? This is part of your consciousness. I see a road. I know that I can walk on the road. It is an objective relational property between my bodily morphology, my muscles and my joints, of me as a human organism and the material world. Again, my consciousness bleeds into the world itself. So the path, the meaning of the path is not something that I project or a social construct to understand. I immediately understand when I see a path, what a path means I can walk on it. But this is afforded to me given the conditions of my body. So there's not necessarily an objective meaning that all are going to perceive in every natural object. For example, a cliff, if I have the arm strength for it, climber's arms and slim body, I can see a cliff as affording climbing. If I'm not really built for it, if I'm afraid of climbing, if I'm afraid of cliff, I'm going to see a cliff having a different affordance of meaning as something I can hurt myself on, something I can fall on. So that meanings, the same object can have various meanings. That's part of the richness of essences, have a rich affordance of meaning. And it's our body's conditions that help expose us to those meanings. So the body itself possesses an intrinsic a priori of affordance and says to experience these objects prior to any social condition. So again, if I were a feral person out in the woods, I'm still going to have this interaction with the natural world that way. Social society did not condition me to know that I can climb a tree, experience trying to climb trees, knowing my body, dialect, it was what the word he will use, dialect with the world is where I'm going to form this consciousness. This isn't something that, again, came to me because society ingrained it into me. Dialect with the world ingrains it into me. And I discover the richness of meaning in the world through this dialect. So biological imperatives are experienced as appetites, and in this way they do not give me a choice if I want to eat, sleep, or reproduce, but they give me the option to find ways to do that. And then this is where culture is going to come from, is as I maybe interact with other people and they show me different ways to eat and different why it's preferable to sleep at one time, or again rituals that come with sleep, that everything within a culture is done in the morning versus done in the evening. Those add the more determined meaning to these a priori appetites of the flesh. So from a natural law perspective, neither society nor economics invent these desires, but they do operate as a means of organizing, again giving rituals, and they manage them. They manage how, when I can go buy food, depending on the grocery stores, in order to satisfy this appetite. Now, from that you get into the complexities of mating rituals, and from that the sexuality and gender that's going to come from that. And so that society operates like clay being molded on top of these armature of these natural appetites. The biological armature is still necessary. It's still a non-negotiable substratum upon which all additions are constructed. And so this accounts for the appeal of social construct theory. So I'm not trying to disprove social construct theory. I'm saying it's one layer, and it's a layer that everything has been boiled down to at the expense of the natural law layer of the armature layer, and that this has been the death of man. And in that regard, the death of an essence is to say, well, everything is just a social construct. There is no essence underneath it all. To conclude then, gender theory says the body has no essential meaning, and feminism is also built very much on this same idea. When we look at the idea of fertility, for example, in the female body, my male body does not have that fertility. That meaning is something that is an exclusive affordance of the feminine body. And we have to then, I'm arguing, take this approach to regain the meaning of the body. We have to look at what affordances each sex has, and from that we can establish that sex and gender are tightly knit, that they are not these separate things, even if there is some flexibility within them.